So DJI just released their new RS4 mini gimbal. DJI RS4 Mini.
This is what you wanted to show me.
As far as I know, the only gimbal that does AI tracking for cameras.
Ooh, and the new silver colorway. Damn, bro, you get some cool shit, eh?
When did this come out?
You're not keeping
It's not
it.
out.
This is sick though. I like the color. Does it come in black though still?
I don't know yet.
Can it support bigger cameras?
Apparently it can support an A7 with a 24-70.
Let's check it out.
Really quickly, I want to mention that DJI did send me the RS4 Mini to test out. They're not sponsoring this video in any way, no money exchanged hands, and they don't have any input on the video or even get to see it before it's released. So the RS4 Mini is targeted at solo content creators or cinematographers who want to use a lightweight setup but can still hold a decent payload. But the RS4 Mini does have some new features that I've never seen before. So the biggest change on the RS4 Mini is this little device right here. This is DJI's new intelligent tracking system, and you've probably seen these before because there are other people that have done this before. Hoam and Ziyun have both done AI tracking gimbals, but the difference is those ones only work with phones. And now this is the first gimbal on the market that can do AI tracking for a camera. This tracking module is magnetic and it has a little clamp on the side. So once you put it near the gimbal, it'll magnetize in place and then it'll be locked. So as a solo creator, this is really good because if you're just shooting by yourself, you usually have to just stick with static shots because no one else can handle the camera for you. But with this gimbal, you're able to make it track you and then it kind of seems like you have someone else helping you. So to enable the tracking, you can just use gestures to start and stop the tracking. So right now this gimbal is set so that if you hold a hand up, that will start the tracking, and you can see that because the light on the tracking module will turn green. And then you're even able to start and stop recording from a distance. And you're able to change these gestures in the settings. We tested this out at our recent Airbnb trip. So we just put the gimbal in the center of the kitchen and we had Jaden enable tracking, and the gimbal was able to follow him around the whole time.
How's the gas here? No? Recording good?
Alright, I'm go. And then cross again.
Cross? Okay. Oh, there you go. Here, have an orange. Ooh, it's just gonna walk out with no shoes. Jeez! Oh, you like me, eh? Why are you following me like that?
But let's say you're shooting something like a wedding and you're actually controlling the gimbal instead of being in front of the camera and you want to use the tracking. Obviously, you don't want to tell the bride or the groom to have to hold up their hand every single time and enable tracking. So if you're a solo cinematographer, just aim the gimbal where you want to track and press the trigger once, and that will enable tracking as well. This is really great for shots that are really hard to frame. So we tested this out in a couple scenarios. I was shooting with my friend Wilson and we had him running forward while the gimbal was pointed backwards towards me. And he didn't even have to look at the gimbal because of the tracking, and it just stayed on me perfectly. We also tried some sideways tracking shots when we were running super fast, and those actually turned out really good. And then we also tried some shots where Wilson was just holding the gimbal as high as possible. And obviously when it's that high, it's going to be really hard to frame. So the tracking definitely came in handy. There are a few settings that you can also change in the gimbal to make the tracking work just a little bit better. So you're able to change the composition of your tracking. So by default, it was set to center tracking subject, and that just means that the gimbal would try to keep your subject in the center of the frame. But what we found out when we're tracking people is that it keeps the head in the center of the frame, and that just leaves a lot of empty space at the top. So instead of that, you can set the composition settings to keep current framing, and then if you set the field of view so that the subject's head is near the top of the frame and you track it, the gimbal will keep that in frame instead so that you don't have a lot of empty space at the top, which does require a little bit more of a setup to make sure that your composition is right beforehand, but it definitely does make the scene look a little bit better. Some other settings you can change is the active track speed, just how fast you want the gimbal to follow you. We tested this out with the slow setting, and you can definitely see that here, the gimbal was lacking a little bit, which makes sense because I was moving pretty fast. And if we change the active track speed to fast, we can definitely see that the gimbal was able to keep up with me a lot better. You can toggle a ring light if you want the light on or off for whatever reason. And then again, you're able to change the gesture settings so that you can customize what gesture you want to start and stop tracking and to start and stop recording. However, even with all these settings changed, the tracking isn't perfect. We did notice that the tracking would jump sometimes if your main subject walks behind another person, and this happened a few times in our testing, so just something to be aware of. One thing to keep in mind when you're using the gestures to start and stop recording is that even when you do those gestures, at least for my RS4 Mini, it does take a little bit of time to start the recording, which isn't too much of a problem for me because I actually have my beep enabled on my camera so that I can actually hear when it starts recording. But if you have that disabled, just keep in mind that when you do the gestures, you will have to wait a little bit to start recording. Some people might start doing their action too fast and the camera doesn't actually pick it up. One other thing to note is that the tracking actually follows what setting your gimbal is on. So we first set it to pan follow mode, which means that the gimbal is able to pan left and right, but it doesn't tilt up and down. And then when we try tracking it, you can see that when I move down, I go out of frame because the gimbal is in pan follow mode and it doesn't tilt down. But if you set the gimbal to pan tilt follow mode, then you can see that the tracking actually does tilt down. So you just have to keep in mind that the tracking will follow whatever mode your gimbal is in. So now let's move on to the build quality and the payload of the gimbal. So the RS4 Mini definitely feels really solid, just like all the other gimbals. I think DJI makes their gimbals really well, everything feels solid and nothing feels cheap. As you can see, the RS4 Mini has a new silver colorway, and this pretty much matches what color their drones are. If you're a fan of black, you might be a little bit disappointed that this does not come in black, it only comes in the silver colorway. You have the secondary briefcase handle, which has come with all the other gimbals in the past. They did make a few upgrades to it. The shape of this is a little bit different, and they also have cold shoe attachments and porter 20 attachments, which does make it easier if you want to mount things like a mic or a monitor onto it. The RS4 Mini has a 2kg payload. We tested this out with the Sony a7 IV and the Sigma 24-70, which is a little bit heavier than the Sony 24-70, and it was still able to hold that easily. I had no issues with balancing it, and no issues with the clearance of the motors as well. This is really great because the gimbal itself is a lot lighter than previous gimbals, just because it is smaller, but even though it is so small, you're still able to hold some of those bigger setups, and that just keeps the whole package a lot lighter and smaller overall. And I'm usually not someone who uses gimbals a lot because it is a little bit too big for me to carry around, but with a package this small, it definitely makes it a lot easier to shoot with. And I was shooting a lot of interior shots at the Airbnb, and I've never felt like the gimbal was too big or too annoying to handle. However, if you're someone who really likes to use bigger setups, you'll be happy to know that this tracking module is actually backwards compatible with the RS4 and the RS4 Pro. I don't actually have that unit to test, but according to the manual, there's a little adapter that you can stick the tracking module onto, and then that would just slot into a port on the RS4 and RS4 Pro. So it's really nice to see that they at least made it backwards compatible with the RS4 line. If you're someone who likes to film their phone instead, you can actually purchase their phone holder. So this feels really solidly built. It is a little bit bigger than some other phone mounts I've seen, but I think I actually prefer this because this is natively compatible with the RS4 Mini. You can just slide it on. It feels really solidly built. Some of these smaller ones, they do feel a little bit cheap, and this definitely feels a lot more sturdy. You also have a cold shoe attachment on the top and a quarter 20 thread on the back. So if you want to do things like mount a mic or a little light, this would definitely come in handy. And what I really appreciate is the way these notches are built, you can slide your phone onto it and it doesn't interfere with any of the buttons because of that groove. If you are interested in the phone holder, you will have to purchase this separately though. A few more things about the build quality. The battery kit is not detachable. I'll go over battery life in a second. Unlike the gimbals like the RS4 and the RS4 Pro, those had removable batteries. This one is just built in. To charge the gimbal, it's just a USB-C on the side. One thing that actually bothered me a lot is that with previous gimbals, they always come with this Arca plate that goes onto the bottom of your camera, but I never really liked these because they didn't really have a way to lock the camera in place, so sometimes the camera would come loose. So instead, I would just put a cage on my camera, and then that would just slide onto the actual plate of the gimbal, and then this can slot into the gimbal itself. But what's really annoying about the RS4 Mini is that this plate actually isn't compatible with a lot of cages. I think I just got lucky here that this was able to work with my tilted cage, but I tried two other small rig cages and this doesn't actually slot into it. So if you are someone who likes to do what I do and put a cage on the gimbal instead of using the Arca plate that it comes with, you will have to test it out to see if your cage is actually compatible with their base plate. If you've seen the RS4 and RS4 Pro, you can actually change the camera from horizontal shooting to vertical shooting. And with the RS4 Mini, they have changed the design. With the RS4 and RS4 Pro, it was pretty fast to switch from horizontal to vertical shooting, but I always felt like the locks were a little bit too tight. It was a little bit annoying to grab onto the latch to pull out the camera. So with this new design, I did find that it was a lot more seamless. You have this little knob here that you turn, and what's really cool is that the handle on this knob goes both ways, so it won't get stuck by your camera. Once it's unlocked, you just have to press into the latch, and then the whole base plate comes out. Then you just have to flip it on its side, insert it, and then lock it back. And if you look at this right now, you can see how fast it takes me to go from horizontal to vertical shooting. So I'm gonna loosen it, press into it, the camera pulls out, flip it on its side, and then you lock it again. And that's it. Obviously, this will throw your camera out of balance, so you will probably have to rebalance the camera, but just being able to switch to this mode that fast is really useful. The RS4 Mini also comes with a few quality of life changes. They're actually really useful. So normally with the gimbals, you're able to change the follow speed from slow, medium to fast or custom, but now they actually have a new responsive mode. And that just makes the gimbal respond faster to your hand movements, which is really useful if you're tracking fast moving subjects like cars, but still giving you the option to use the smooth mode if you just want to get some really slow, buttery footage. On the left side of the gimbal, you also have a switch that allows you to control what the joystick does. So by default, the joystick just controls where the gimbal is pointing, but if you flick it up, you can now use the joystick to control zoom. And if you have a power zoom lens on your camera, you can actually use that joystick to control the power zoom, which is really useful because then you don't have to reach over to the camera to zoom in or out. But if you don't have a power zoom lens, you can also just enable clear image zoom on your camera and then use a joystick to zoom in and out that way instead. Just some small changes that makes the user experience with the gimbal a lot better. Now for battery life, I mentioned that you can't remove the battery anymore, which means that if you're someone who uses the gimbals for a really long time, you're not able to just switch out the battery anymore, you would have to charge it. However, even on the RS4 and RS4 Pro, the battery life on those were so good that even when I'm shooting like a full day wedding with the gimbal, I never had to change the battery or charge it, so I don't really think that's a problem. But with the built-in battery, it does make the overall package a little bit bigger just because you're not able to detach the battery when you're traveling with it, which may or may not be an issue for you, but with this gimbal being so small, it didn't really bother me. Even though you don't have removable battery anymore, you're still getting 13 hours of advertised battery life, which is really good. That'll definitely be enough for most people's full day of shooting. And if you do happen to run a battery, they advertise that a quick 30-minute charge will give you an extra 5 hours of battery life. With the old gimbal handles, if you tap the button on the side, you're able to just see 4 dots of your battery life, and you're not able to get an actual percentage. With this, because it is built in and they changed where the charging point is, you don't have those dots at the bottom that show your battery life. Instead, when the gimbal is off, you can just press the power button once and that'll show you your battery life percentage. And then when you plug the gimbal into charge, you can see the battery percentage and it'll tell you if you're fast charging or not. And I think I actually prefer that a lot. I really like just seeing the battery life and knowing exactly how much I have left. Now let's move on to the pricing. I don't have the exact pricing of everything yet, so if anything changes, I'll just overlay on the screen here. But the RS4 Mini by itself without the tracking module comes in right now at $369. And if you do want the bundle with the tracking module included into it, this will be $459 USD. Again, if you were interested in the phone holder as well, I don't have the pricing yet, but once I get that, I'll lay it over here on the screen. And overall, that's pretty much it. I think my experience with this has been pretty good. Again, I'm not someone who usually uses gimbals a lot. I usually just find them a little bit too big and cumbersome to lug around and use. But with something that's so small that can still hold a decent sized package, it does make me more inclined to use a gimbal in situations when I want to get some really smooth shots. And even when I handed this gimbal off to other people who do regularly use gimbals, they also mentioned how light the whole setup seems. I think it's really impressive that DJI is able to start to make the gimbal smaller and smaller while still being able to keep a payload with a pretty common setup like a Sony a7 IV and a 24-70 and still be able to hold that perfectly fine. I'm super curious to hear what your thoughts about the RS4 Mini is and if you think it's something that you would pick up. If you have any questions about the RS4 Mini or are wondering some things that I might have left out, definitely let me know in the comments below. If this review was helpful, definitely give the video a like, subscribe to see more photo video content, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.